everybody, Pam Otto here from the Hickory Knolls Discovery Center. I'm coming to you today from the prairie that's behind Hickory Knolls. This is an area that we've worked on pretty extensively to try and restore back to a condition that existed maybe 200 or 300 years ago. We've brought back many plants that were native to this area, but and with that have come different types of native animals as well. We now see our native ground squirrels, the 13-line ground squirrel that we didn't used to see here. Of course, animals like that bring predators like our native red-tailed hawks and our native coyotes. One animal, though, that we have not been able to bring back for actually a variety of reasons is the native bison. That's what we're going to talk about today, is the American bison, its role in ecology, and its role that it played here in Illinois' history. Now, bison, as we'll see in our slides, they were never present in the numbers that you would see in the Hollywood depictions of the American frontier. We did, though, have bison in Illinois. I wanted to give you an idea of the size of the animal that we're talking about. Bear with me here for just a second while I pick up a bison skull. This was part of our collection at Hickory Knolls. It shows just how large of a head these animals have. We've also got a native bison pelt. I'm going to lift it up here, and then we'll scan over it too, so you can get a sense of just how massive these animals were. You know, I'm talking to you at a time of year when our thoughts are turning to giving. As part of our talk today, I also wanted to talk about some of the gifts of the bison, the parts of the animal that were useful to our Native American people that lived here, as well as the early settlers that came to this region as well. Come with me, won't you? And we'll take a look at those slides and learn a little bit more about this creature we call the bison. Hi, everybody. We're back inside now, and we'll take a look at these slides we've prepared. Give me just a second here to pull things up. We'll get going now with our story of bison in Illinois. Now, I don't know what you think of when you think of the word bison. Maybe it's the quintessential thundering herd as was depicted in so many movies over the years that were made in Hollywood. Maybe you can recall vacations you've taken. This is a picture of Custer State Park in South Dakota, where there is quite a large managed herd in that area in the Black Hills. But what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at this intriguing animal called the bison, and we're going to also examine their status in our great state of Illinois. First of all, though, let's go over some terminology. I've been saying bison all along, but most people call these animals buffalo. What is the difference? Well, I tell you, both of them are large, horned, ox-like animals. Both of them are members of the Bovidae family. But I tell you, that's about where the similarities end. Let's take a look at these two animals here. These are, scientifically speaking, these are the animals that we call buffalo. On the left, you'll see the Cape buffalo, which is indigenous to Africa. And on the right, we have the Asian water buffalo, present in the southeast part of Asia. Now, both of these animals have some physical similarities to our native bison, but they're also quite different. The animal on the left there, the Cape buffalo, is still present in some herds across Africa. As a wild animal, it has not been domesticated at all. The animal on the right, the Asian water buffalo, there's actually several dozen different breeds of this animal. It's used still is a working animal. It can be used for hauling carts and other agricultural equipment. It's also raised for its milk. Maybe you've heard of buffalo mozzarella. That's actually made not from our North American animal, but from the milk of the Asian water buffalo. Here's the animals that are technically called the bison. Our American bison and its cousin, the European bison. If we look at their scientific names, we'll see that here in the United States, we have bison bison, and in Europe, they have Bison bonasus. If we go back and look at our African and Asian species, you'll see that they are completely from two completely different genus names. So the relationship, the taxonomy relationship between these animals is not terribly close. The European bison actually has been hunted to extinction in the wild. There are some efforts to bring back the animal via managed herds and in areas, natural areas in Europe. Some of those animals are being turned loose, which is not too unlike what we have going on here in the United States. Our bison too, across the continent, were hunted to near extinction. And those that remained were kind of handled quite tenderly there for a while until the gene pool was allowed to be brought back through careful breeding and management. So far, we've been using the term bison repeatedly to refer to this magnificent animal. The buffalo appears a lot in our modern culture. You probably are familiar with the song Home, Home on the Range. Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam. There's also this fellow here, Buffalo Bill Cody, who made his name in Wild West shows. There's the Buffalo Bills football team. There's also the Colorado Buffs, the college team. And of course, there's the flip side of the Indian head nickel. Out in New York, we've got the city of Buffalo, which was actually named after the Buffalo River that flows near there. A little bit closer to home, there are at least 14 places in Illinois that have Buffalo in their names. Buffalo Grove is not too far from here. There's actually another one out west in Carroll County. There's a Buffalo Township in Ogle County. Out towards Starved Rock, there's Buffalo Rock State Park. And of course, can't forget about all the Buffalo Wild Wings that are around the area. So how was it that one name sprang from another? How did these two names get mixed up? Well, we're going to blame the French for this. Here's our French voyageurs. I believe that is Father Marquette, a depiction of him traveling maybe across Illinois. The word buffalo actually comes from the French word for beef animal or ox. It's pronounced beef, buffalo. You can kind of see maybe how the words started to be combined to mean the same thing. Here's a couple of excerpts from journals here from Jacques Marquette. He wrote in 1674, we call them wild cattle because they are very similar to our domestic cattle. The head is very large, the forehead is flat, and 1.5 feet wide between the horns, which are exactly like those of our oxen, but black and much larger. The whole of the head, the neck, and a portion of the shoulders are covered with a thick mane like that of horses, which makes them hideous, and falling over their eyes prevents them from seeing what is before them. Okay, that's one person's depiction. Here is what Charlevoix had to say, writing about his first encounters with these animals. In this route, we see only vast meadows. The grass grows so high that one might lose oneself amongst it. But everywhere we meet with paths that are as beaten as they can be in the most populous countries, yet nothing passes through them buffaloes. So now to contrast this, the word bison, which we saw in the scientific names for these animals, and it's the word that I tend to use when talking about them, it comes from the Greek word, but it means the same thing as the French word. It means from a beef animal or an ox. We're talking about very large animals here. When Charlevoix talked about the paths that were beaten down by these animals, a bull bison can weigh about a ton, about 2,000 pounds, and measures 6 feet tall at the shoulder. The cows, or the females, they're a little bit smaller at about 1,000 pounds and 4 to 5 feet tall. They give birth to calves that can weigh anywhere from 30 to 70 pounds. So definitely some large scale animals we're talking about here. I did want to point one thing out. Some of that writing had mentioned the horns of these animals, and this is an animal that does have true horns. In some of our meetings in the past, we've talked about deer and how deer have antlers. There is a difference between the horn on an animal and an animal that has antlers. Horns are permanent and year-round, and they don't go away. They are a bony structure, permanent bony structure that grows from the top of the skull, and they're covered usually with some sort of colored keratin. In the case of the bison, it's a black covering. Maybe you've seen in movies or museums depictions of powder horns made from these horn coverings. These will actually loosen and come off once the animal dies. Antlers, by contrast, are semi-permanent. In our area, it's the white-tailed deer that has antlers, and it's the male of the species that grows those antlers. He grows them mainly to show his fitness for breeding, and so that he can spar with other males and quest for territory and for breeding rights. But he'll shed those antlers. In fact, that's going to be starting pretty soon around here as we get into the winter months. It's more of a burden to carry those antlers around, more of a burden than they're actually worth once we get through the breeding season. So that's where you might have heard about people who go out in search of sheds that have been dropped and left behind by those deer. I kind of laugh. This is not a photo that we took here at the Park District. This was from a public photo sharing site. Look what's surrounding this deer skull. It's laying in poison ivy. I sure hope that whoever took this picture got out of there before they got too itchy, but it's kind of a funny little aside looking at that photo. So let's move along and let's delve a little bit deeper into the story of the bison. What I'd like to do now is take a little look at when bison actually lived here in Illinois, wild and in their natural state. We're going to take a look at what happened to them, and we're also going to try and answer the question of, will they come back? So as you know, one of our state's nicknames is the Prairie State. This map here shows how our state was once divided up between forest and prairie. The yellow here designates prairie. Of course, much of that is farmland today, but at one time it did provide some pretty ideal habitat for these large grazing herbivores that eat tons of grass every year. Now, I do want to say we never had bison present in the quantities that were depicted in those old movies and that were shown in the history books. These are more the populations that we would see farther west in, say, South Dakota and into North Dakota. These animals were first hunted by the Plains Indians, the Native American tribes out there. And then this is where Buffalo Bill Cody and some of those other famous hunters really made their names, because there were just so many animals out west. I don't have any exact population estimates for Illinois, but the general thinking is that the herds while present here, were much smaller in size than what was seen farther west. Now, there was a way of thinking, if we go back to, say, the 1960s and before, the writings that existed then said that, for example, in 1945, that the bison appeared east of the Mississippi River in large numbers no earlier than 1600 and became extinct in this area by 1800. And then Paul Parmalee, a famous Illinois naturalist, in 1968 wrote that the nearly uniform lack of bison remains in prehistoric Illinois Indian sites points to the fact that the animal simply was not available. So all these gentlemen who had examined the evidence before them came to these conclusions that we just didn't have bison for a very long period of time. However, since that time, more archaeological and paleontological research has sort of reversed those opinions. If we go farther back in time, far before the arrival of the French and use of the term "bœuf" and buffalo, if we look at the Potawatomi language, we find out that they actually had a word for bison, Pachuki. And of course, back then, the Potawatomi and most Native American tribes did not have a written history. It was all oral history. So you take a somewhat complicated word like that and you mix in people from Europe, from other countries. They might speak with their own sorts of accents. It ends up that Potawatomi word had a lot of different spellings, a lot of pronunciations. Deliette called it Pistakoi. Charlevoix said Pistakui. Marquette wrote Pisuku. And the remains of those words today, one of the most commonly heard variations of it is Pistaki. That's a town up in McHenry County. It's also a lake up in the chain. Piscataquis Creek, which is in Boone County, is also attributed as being derived from that Potawatomi word for bison. So clearly there's evidence of this animal being around here several hundred years ago. Then we have this map that provides further evidence. This was one of the earliest depictions of this region, dates back to the 1700s. If we zoom in on a couple of features here, we'll see that here's yet another variation on that Potawatomi name, Pestaconti. The Buffalo River, that was actually off the Chicago River. And then if we look at this detail down here in the corner, the map artist actually went into a lot of detail showing the buffalo, and bison hunting that was very, very common in this region back at that time. This is a map that shows pre-settlement what northeastern Illinois looked like in terms of settlements. These little huts here, these icons all represent wigwams and known Native American villages. And all these lines are how these villages were connected and how these people moved around. And for the most part, each of these lines, while followed by the humans, were actually first started by bison. Just like today, when you walk in a forest preserve, you might notice a trail going off to one side that's smaller and narrower. Chances are that's a deer path or a game trail. Well, hundreds of years ago, rather than pushing their way through that tall grass that grew in our prairies, the native people would just follow the paths of the bison. In fact, some of these roads, the roads that we have today actually can be traced back to when bison would roam up and down. I've always heard that Route 31 and Route 25 on either side of the Fox River, they were footpaths for the native people that were then followed by the settlers, but actually originated with our large grazing herbivores. So this is a pretty interesting collection of papers. It's called Records of Early Bison in Illinois. You can find it on the internet. If you can't find it and you'd like a copy, drop me a line. My email will be at the end of this talk. But this is a compilation of papers that tracks and puts together the records of early bison in our state. In 1971, Dr. Turnbull, who's affiliated with the Field Museum, he brought in the remains of 2 bison that were kind of dug out during some quarrying that was going on out towards Ottawa, Illinois. Ottawa Silica Works is a sand mining operation out there. And through various dating methods, those bones were determined to be about 4,000 years old. So again, not 1600 to 1800 as was originally thought. These were much, much older relics. Then a little bit later on, in 2005, excavations along the Illinois River found even more bison remains, and something really cool. They found in some of those remains projectile points or arrowheads, showing that these bison, not only were they present in Illinois a long time ago, but they were actually killed by humans that were living in the area at the time. So another big watershed discovery. All in all, there are 133 sites that have been discovered so far. They span across 44 counties in Illinois, so little under half of our counties containing bison remains here in Illinois. So apparently this animal was here a lot earlier than we thought it was, and it was present in much greater span, physical size of territory than we had originally thought. Here's a couple of maps. The map here on the left shows paleontology sites, so scientists that are looking at the animal remains of the bison. This middle map shows distribution of archaeological sites, so scientists that were looking at human developments that found human remains. And then this third map here combines the data of those two other maps. Pretty close to home, there's been bison found in Aurora, near an area called Phillips Park. Actually, Phillips Park has what's now called Mastodon Lake, but I suspect that these bison remains were found in that same area where the Mastodon remains were found. Same thing happened in Kendall County. Several bison parts were found along with some mastodons in a property called the Bamford Farm. Now, this begs the question, now, how was it that for so long people thought that we just didn't have bison here, that these old archaeological sites weren't showing a lot of bison remains? Well, a couple of different things have happened. One, some of the sites, some of the most significant sites have been along the Illinois River and have been discovered during periods of drought. So times when the water levels are low, bison remains will kind of be uncovered as the water levels shrink. They're better able to be seen. And the other thing, I thought this was really interesting. There's something called the Schlepp effect. Even when hunting was carried out locally, methods for butchering and processing to reduce an animal to manageable units usually resulted in few bones being returned to the settlement. And think about that. You know, if you've got a heavy load to carry, and these were some massive animals. Again, remember those bull bison weigh 2,000 pounds. If you're part of a hunting party and you've tracked a herd
far from home and you manage to take down a bison, are you going to carry the whole thing back? And again, we're talking, a few thousand years ago. There weren't a lot of innovations. There weren't horses at that time. Probably weren't wheels at that time or machines that could help transport. Most of the transportation that occurred at the time was by dragging things. So are you going to drag home the entire bison, or are you going to take what's most valuable to you? Maybe the hide and the meat. That's most likely what occurred. And then what was left was kind of spread out in the hot, dry environment of our prairies. The harsh winters too would take their toll. So something like a bison skull might be there for 100 years. I'm not going to try and put an exact number on how long it would last, but weathering and the weather elements definitely took their toll on bison remains of these early Illinois inhabitants. Again, we're talking 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So they really just kind of disappeared as time went on, leaving no trace. We can see that a little bit. I held up this skull in our introduction here, and you can see what has happened even to this fairly well-preserved skull. This was a donation that was given to Hickory Knolls. And if we zoom in here, you'll see that some little creatures, before we got a hold of the skull, rodents had chewed a corner of it away. They'd also chewed away the top of this is that keratin covering I was talking about on the horn, chewed that away as well. So rodents probably did their share of making our bison remains go away as well. Couple other things that kind of led to the disappearance of bison in Illinois. One, we actually had a pretty dramatic change, short-lived change, but nonetheless, it took its toll. In the late 18th century, it was called the Little Ice Age. Long, cold winters took place, and the bison herds couldn't really get away from there. A number of animals died, not just bison, a lot of different types of wildlife, a lot of people too, were not able to survive that Little Ice Age period. And then, of course, there was widespread hunting. We've talked about this in a lot of our talks. Prior to the initiation of conservation laws and the idea of putting limits on what could be hunted, there was pretty wide-scale slaughter of animals, especially once guns became prevalent here in the new country. Here's some figures that we've gleaned from different writings. In 1668, a group of Illinois Indians carried on a 5-week hunt that resulted in the killing of 1,200 bison. 1673, Father Marquette, in his writings, described what he saw as a herd of about 400 bison. In 1680, the Miami tribe used fire to encircle a herd of bison. And then they killed 120 of them as the animals tried to escape that fire. Hennepin also wrote at that time that along the Kankakee River, bison are ordinarily in great numbers, as it is easy to judge by the bones, the horns, and the skulls that we saw on all sides. So at that time, bison were being slaughtered, those bones were being cast aside. Very, very few of those bones remain today for those reasons we discussed earlier. Also, as we see the French explorers coming in and the fur trade taking off, there was a lot of trafficking of hides. They were very popular in Europe. French hunters here processed 13,000 bison and sent them through southern Illinois down to New Orleans. And then in the late 1700s, the bison were still present in enough numbers that they could swamp a canoe when they were swimming across the Illinois River. Now, and that's getting close to that period of the Little Ice Age. There's also the widespread hunting going on. So um, it was becoming very clear that this was an animal that had a lot of uses. Now, this is a chart that shows just how useful the bison could be. Remember, we said we'd talk a little bit about the gifts of the bison. This depiction here really shows how useful so many parts of this animal were. The hide was used for bags and beds and belts and blankets, bridles, caps, cradles, mittens for dolls. I thought that was interesting. Dresses and leggings, moccasins. It would cover the structure known as a sweat lodge. It was used to make shirts and tapestries. I could cover a teepee or a wigwam with it. And it also made a wonderful winter robe. That bison hide I held up earlier was really heavy. I can just imagine how warm that would keep someone on a cold winter night. Bison, they've got this tough hide, but they've also got quite a bit of hair up here on the mane, even on the tail back here. The hair was braided into rope. It could be used to line moccasins. It was used to fill pillows with. Lots of different uses for the hair. And of course, there's meat that could be eaten immediately. It could be dried as a means of preservation. It could then be reconstituted and added into soups and stews. This one was kind of funny. The animal dung that was left behind, it actually had a couple of very important uses. One, it was used to keep the baby's bottom dry, one of our very first baby powders. And then it was also used as fuel. This was a trick our early American settlers picked up from the Native Americans. Those dried buffalo, they were called chips. Buffalo chips could be collected, and when they were very dry, they actually made a good fuel for a fire. There's also early reference to settlers collecting those buffalo chips and making lean-tos and shelters out of them. So literally from head to tail, these animals had a lot of uses. Now, was every animal used to this extent? No, like we talked about a little bit ago with the schlep factor. Early on, the early native people had more immediate needs for survival, and making ornaments probably wasn't a huge priority. There might have been some of that, but if they were carrying parts of the animal great distances, some of these objects were going to get left behind. But just a neat look at the gifts of the bison and things that I think are still used today. Now, the bison did leave Illinois. Some were able to swim and make their way west, but the last ones that remained here in Illinois, the last records of them showed that they were killed in 1808. So well over 200 years ago now, bison left Illinois. But they didn't leave for good. I hate to leave on a downer note like that. There's actually some very exciting developments when we talk about bison in Illinois. I mentioned the restoration efforts. We do restoration of native natural landscapes here at the Park District. The County Forest Preserve District is involved in natural areas restoration, and of course the state, and even on national levels. Lots of ecologists are working to bring back the native plants and animals. Now, it wouldn't really be practical for us here at the St. Charles Park District to bring bison back to our natural areas. Our biggest natural area is Hickory Knolls, and it measures about 130 acres. Um, that's literally a drop in the bucket for what a bison would need to survive. Even one animal wouldn't be able to make it on, not to mention the lengths that we'd have to go to make sure that the bison didn't roam beyond our natural area into the neighbor's yard. So not practical for a small scale restoration project like we have here in St. Charles. But there are places around here that you can go to see bison. Now, Fermilab, a lot of people are familiar with the animals that live there. I will say they have been there pretty much since Fermilab opened. Was it over 40, getting close to 50 years ago now, I want to say Fermilab has been in existence. And bison were placed on that property, not so much as part of the prairie restoration, but as a nod to the heritage and the prairie lands that once stood where Fermilab, National Accelerator Lab, is today. There was a now Fermilab is actually our biggest contiguous chunk of open space in this part of the state. I want to say it's around 6,000 acres. But it's got roads running through it. It wouldn't be practical to let these animals roam throughout that entire property. So they're pretty well fenced in. It is a small number of animals, and they are very closely managed. But they do help keep the grasses in check there. And as we look at that field of restoration, remember the idea being to bring the land and what it supports back to, well, we used to target pre-settlement conditions, but more and more we're realizing that's not really possible or even feasible. People aren't going away, so to try and create an ecosystem around something that doesn't exist anymore, and people are always going to be here. We're looking at different ways to bring back what we can, given what we have to work with in these times. So with a prairie ecosystem, you've got and here in Illinois, it is the tall grass prairie. You've got a mix of grasses and plants that we call forbs, which are the flowering plants or the wildflowers on the prairie. In the early days of restoration in this area, we'd be throwing out mixes of seeds that included both grasses and forbs. And over time, what would happen is the grasses would become to dominate. In fact, we still see that in some of our restoration projects. And the thought was, okay, so we brought the native plants back, and fire has been brought back as a management tool. But what was missing from those efforts was these large grazing herbivores. These bison will go in and they will feed on the grasses, remove some of the plants, and give the flowering plants a chance to bloom. Without the bison, sometimes the grasses end up taking over. So there are restoration projects in Illinois where they've actually had the means, the size of property, as well as the dedication and the monetary backing in order to be able to bring bison back. One of those is a little west of here, the Nachusa grasslands. The town is listed as Franklin Grove. It's actually, it's not too far from Oregon, Illinois. And Nachusa is a nature conservancy parcel. And back in October of 2014, they brought in, I believe it was 30 bison. And prior to that, there was a lot of work that went into getting the area prepared. The grasses and forbs themselves, this restoration project has been going on for a few decades now, so they were in good shape. But what needed to happen was Nature Conservancy people needed a way to contain the bison so that they wouldn't get out of hand. So Huge fences were put in place, and when you think about what it takes to contain a cow or a horse, multiply that, because bison are well, they're bigger and they're stronger and they're sometimes more determined. So you need a pole that's going to be able to withstand pressure should a bison want to try to push its way through. But they've been doing quite well at Nachusa. I want to say that they try to keep the herd out there at around 100 animals. Again, that was starting with 30 in 2014. The herd has grown, and then there's animals that are sold off each year to kind of maintain that ideal number for the size of land that is there. Another place that bison have been reintroduced is to the Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. Some of you may know this as the Joliet Arsenal. It's down in Wilmington, Illinois. And this started about a year after the introduction was made at Nachusa. This bison came back to Midewin in 2015. Again, same preparations had to be made, fences had to be put in. And this herd too is doing quite well. The bison themselves are healthy, and we like to think that the prairie itself is healthier too for having these large grazing herbivores now roaming on the prairie once again. If you've got any questions, I would be honored if you drop me a line. My email address is down there at the bottom, Potto, P-O-T-T-O, at St. Charles Parks, abbreviated STC Parks, and notice Parks is plural, and that's .org. I also wanted to let you know, we're in just such a strange time now with our COVID mitigations. They've taken us back to phase 3. I haven't been able to visit with you in person this month. But I wanted to toss this out there for any of you who are familiar with the video chat platform Zoom. We do this program called the Good Natured Hour. It's every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. And it's kind of an outgrowth of the newspaper column that I've been writing for several years now. The general format of the Zoom sessions are we take the most recent column topic and kind of expound on that a little bit. There's always things when I write a column that don't fit in neatly. It might be a little bit more about a pollinator that affects the plant I was writing about. It might be a little bit more of a backstory of a park I might be writing about. There's always more to the story. So we lead off with that, and then the next, say, 45 minutes or so are kind of a roundup of late-breaking nature news. In the spring and summer, it might be things that are blooming. I know shortly after we started doing this program, there was a really fascinating event in downtown St. Charles when a swarm of bees landed in front of Kilwin's ice cream shop. And we got to go over with the camera and video that, and then kind of give a report of the bee swarm removal from downtown St. Charles. And the bees all did make it out safely and are living happily in a hive west of town. So just fun little things like that. I would love to have you join us. Again, I can give you information on that if you're interested. It is a little late. 8 o'clock at night on Tuesday, and we do have to charge a fee that kind of covers the cost of the Zoom license that we have. What remains after that, we put towards the care and well-being of the animals at Hickory Knolls. So anyway, just wanted to toss that out there. If you're looking for something to do, I'd love to have you join us on a Tuesday night. Drop me a line if you'd like more information on that. And lastly, I always like to leave on a high note. Couldn't resist with this. Kind of plays on both of the words we've been using through our talk today. What did the buffalo say to his son when he left for college? Say it with me. Bye, son. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this look at bison, also known as buffalo, here in Illinois. And hope that we can someday soon gather in person again. Until then, take care, stay well, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye now.